All right, let's get started. Thank you, everyone. This is the, welcome to the City Council Chambers. This is the meeting of the Legislative Investigations Committee. Please turn off all cell phones and sign in if you would like to testify, and please indicate on the sign-in sheet that you would like to speak or not. In attendance, we have Vice Chair, Councilmember McCray to my left. To her left, the bill sponsor and representative of the 3rd District, Councilmember Dorsey.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
We've also been joined by Councilmember Bullock of the 9th District,
Chair.
Councilmember Clark of the 14th District, and Councilmember Sneed, member of the committee representing the 13th District. We also saw Rebecca Simmons, General Counsel for the Council President's Office. I think I saw Anthony Jones here at some point from the President's Office, and we're also joined by Nina Themelis from the Mayor's Office. And Mara James from Finance. The purpose of this hearing is inviting the President of the Baltimore City Board of Elections and the Election Director for the Baltimore City Board of Elections to brief the City Council on preparations and readiness for the upcoming of the 2020 primary and general elections in Baltimore City. I would like to take an opportunity to give the bill sponsor an opportunity to speak about the bill. We then will move to testimony first, and then agency reports. So we'll do public testimony first in this hearing, which I know is a slight deviation from how we usually do things. We do ask that testimony be kept at 3 minutes, and we will have a timer to keep track. With that, I hand it over to Councilmember Dorsey.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Look, elections are important. It's important that we hold them, and we hold them well, and that we ensure that everybody who has the right to vote is has as accessible an opportunity to vote as we can possibly afford them. Baltimore has had problems. I don't know how bad Baltimore's problems are in relation to other places. I just know that we have problems, and they get reported on when they occur. And I think that it is in the public's interest for us to have a conversation about that, and for us to look at, certainly some of the issues that have come up in 2016, 2018, other years past. There's certainly a variety of different reporting and media and voices that we can pretty easily suss out on this. And so I'm very thankful that we have folks from the board with us today, as well as others who are coming to testify and share their experience from various viewpoints. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. All right. So the council member sent me some names ahead of time, but again, if there are other people who would like to speak, please sign in. We'll start with Mr. John Willis, University of Baltimore. If you could come up, state your name, and if you do have written testimony, you can hand it out, provide it to the committee.
Thank you, Councilman. I don't have testimony. I just got notified of the hearing. I'm happy to produce whatever length reports you want.
Sure.
And in fact, just as way of background, I've been working in elections for nearly 50 years and have done numerous studies and reports for the state Board of Elections, as well as edit a newsletter every 2 weeks that goes around the country. And Councilman Dorsey, you made reference to other jurisdictions. I can assure you from the work that I do on a regular basis that the city's problems are not unusual. In fact, everything that has occurred here over the last 20 to 30 years has occurred elsewhere, and in many situations to a much more complicating circumstance. Just in 2019, this past November, I reported on problems in Northampton County, which is east in Allentown, where they didn't do their LNA properly, and they lost, just didn't count votes in a particular race. York County, where they had problems. Houston, Texas, where they didn't get their tabulations done until 2:30 in the morning. And so elections are a complex enterprise. They're very complex. They deal with lots of people and lots of changes. The problems that we've had over the years in Baltimore City have generally related to those times in which we have changed voting systems. The two mentioned in part of the background I saw here were 2006 and 2016. 2006 was the first time Baltimore City had ever used electronic poll books. And in fact, the poll books didn't arrive until very, very close to the primary election. And there was, I was not involved in the primary. In fact, the result of that primary where judges were unfamiliar with how to operate the systems and many of the precincts opened late, resulted in the University of Baltimore getting involved with the Baltimore City Board of Elections with regard to training. The next election that really had things that you might consider unusual was 2016, as I think I said publicly in the media and to the State Board of Elections. That was the election in which we moved from our touchscreen systems to optical stand-based systems. The first time that Baltimore City had used paper ballots since 1934. And there was a massive change in the procedures and protocol, and indeed the equipment that was, oh, that's a problem. I always get a hook.
No, you're good. Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. And those problems were, in my estimation, primarily a result of a complete change in the equipment that was being used and the unfamiliarity of the judges. Now, most of those judges came through our training program, but the unanticipated consequences, it didn't just happen in the city. The media focused on the city, but the same problems occurred in Prince George's County, Montgomery County, Baltimore County, Anne Arundel County, and the neighboring jurisdictions. The city got the brunt of the attention in that election. Fortunately, the mistakes that were made, primarily it had to do with the improper scanning of provisional ballots. Fortunately, it was the first time that the Baltimore City Council election was held coterminous with the presidential primary, which is obviously of concern to all the council members this April 28th. But those system changes resulted in the improper scanning of ballots, primarily in about 30 precincts. We had 296 precincts, and it was a little over 10% of the precincts in which did not operate properly. Massive changes occurred statewide, so much so that the state board appointed a committee to come up with recommendations how to change the procedures on alerting. Remember, we're using scanners that had never, ever in the history of Baltimore City been in a polling place, and too many judges and voters. I was actually visited precincts that year. Voters actually were in a hurry, and they went straight to the scanner with their provisional ballot. I had to stop one at my own precinct in Charles Village. And judges admitted afterwards, well, I didn't know what this scanner was, and so that's where I put the ballots. And that did not occur in the analysis of that problem in 2016. That just didn't occur in precincts with low education and where you might have typical, your estimate might be that those were the problems that occurred. No, they occurred in Mount Washington. They occurred all over the city, primarily due to changes in chief judges, which was the particular problem in Mount Washington that time, to judges who were simply unfamiliar and unprepared. And so as a result of that, the state changed procedures. We had a nice sign, I wish I'd brought one today, that said no scanning provisional ballots, which is now prominently displayed in the precincts. That problem was cleared up in the general election, which was a very large election with over 2.8 million voters statewide. 2018 primary and the 2018 general election also operated within very acceptable margins of problems. What I don't have, but what I can be acquired for the council, is we actually know from the electronic poll books when the polls were opened, and we know when they were closed. And the same thing with every piece of equipment, we have a time indicator on it. And yes, sometimes the problem precinct gets exaggerated. Unfortunately, Tom Hall was at YPR, was at one of the precincts up on Utah Street, and I said, that was where Mr. Jones, I know, Mr. Jones had to go up and fire the chief judge on the spot to clear up that problem. And that was also the precinct in which it was not the election board, it was the local person in charge of the facility had locked the equipment in a room that we didn't, which was unknown. So the judges went there, got there on time, and they couldn't find the equipment, couldn't find the person operating the facility, and unlocked it. But again, I want to remind you, we now have 297 precincts. Next February 4th, and on April 28th, I'm sure we'll be well into the 90 percentiles, and in some of recent elections, we've been at 95, 98% opening on time. I don't see any reason that our modification. We do have a couple changes I worry about, but not the numbers don't worry me. And those numbers, I tell these to the judges that we see are as follows. One is, I'm going to wrap up with the changes so you're aware of the changes. The changes that are coming, I'm happy to stay and answer questions as well. The changes are, for the first time ever in the history of Maryland, absentee ballots can now be brought to the precinct and turned in as opposed to being simply postmarked. And there's a separate yellow bag in which those absentee ballots are supposed to go, and they're with their outside envelopes. And the chief judges are to have everyone sign in and acknowledge the receipt of that absentee ballot. But that's a new process, and I always worry when we introduce new bags of commingling or improper placement into precincts. That's a point of emphasis. Another one is same-day registration. The state legislature, in its infinite wisdom, enacted same-day registration at the polling place. We've had that in early voting for the two last election cycles. And that's accompanied by, from the state, a new 82-page manual. And I'm sure if I gave it all to all members of the city council and gave you a couple days to memorize it, that there'd be very few 100% on how to handle one of 16 different types of scenarios of a voter that could show up, with whether or not the identification is proper or not. I worry about that a little bit, not so much about February, because the numbers I think are going to be small. In 2016, we had, in the entire 7th Congressional District in Baltimore City, only 78 same-day registered voters. So I don't think we're going to have thousands of people flocking to the polls to do same-day registration. I do think that becomes an increasing problem as April comes along, where turnout may be in the 40 percentiles, and then in the general election where we may hit 70%. So same-day registration, absentee ballots, and a little other couple procedural things, and I'll stop there and wait for questions.
Thank you. First one we have in is from Councilmember Snead.
Yes, I'm curious as to how the polling sites are chosen.
Pardon?
How are the polling sites chosen?
I'm going to
So
defer to
we'll do the
Mr.
agency
Armstrong.
question. Yeah. So I did testimony first, and then we'll do the agency presentations as well, so that we can hold that question. Is it? If you're okay with that? Thank you. Next up, we have Linda Eberhardt and or Martha McKenna. Are you guys coming together or separate? Wasn't sure how you. Okay.
We do have a hand up.
Yeah, I knew you had some sort of presentation. So.
Okay, my name is Linda Eberhardt. I've been involved in campaigns probably a few years less than John. 45 years ago, when Councilwoman Mary Pat Clark started, was my first campaign as a volunteer, and have continued through most of the campaigns in Baltimore City. Martha, coming up, we can do this together. Martha called and said we both were involved in campaigns in 2016 in the primary that John said was very problematic. Well, yes, it was problematic through the state, but we were the only subdivision that our election was decertified. And what do we mean by decertified? Well, yes, provisional ballots were a problem, but it wasn't just 30 precincts. There were 80 precincts where scanned ballots went through, and there were a total, based on the state numbers, 797 ballots that were scanned that should not have been scanned. And when they went to the warehouse, they found 457 ballots that were never counted, and they were just stuck various places. So I'm not here to talk about what happened really in 16, because that's past. What we want to talk about is moving forward and what we want to do now. And our goal is, what we believe on this handout, is that every voter should be able to cast a vote and have it counted. So, what are the three things that we believe should be done? The first one is for polls to open on time. That means every single poll needs to be open at 7 o'clock, period. No exceptions. What happened in 16 at these polls that we had to go to court for didn't open until 10 o'clock. And the court said at 6 o'clock that night, we could extend the voting hours until 10 o'clock. So at 8 o'clock, what did we do? We did robocalls, we pulled volunteers and knocked on doors, but we had very few people who were able to come out, or decided not to, or weren't home. And there were lots of people who were turned away from that polling place. But there were many other polling places that the court would not extend because it wasn't more than 2 hours. So it's not good enough to say a poll, if they open at 7:30, that's okay, or 8 o'clock, that's okay. I wouldn't be standing here if I thought the problem was solved. In the primary election in 18, it was still not solved. The example that John gave was in the district I was working, the 43rd district, one of the heaviest polling locations, and that poll did not open until 10 o'clock. And over 100 voters were turned away. And so it's not good enough just to say, well, we can extend the time. So whatever we have to do. In Baltimore County, they seem to be able to set up the polls the night before and get Baltimore County employees to set everything up, secure everything, so whatever problems there were the night before, they were resolved that day. So they don't have those kinds of issues. I'm not saying that is a solution for us in Baltimore City, but we need to be creative to figure out how we can get every single person who comes at 7 o'clock to vote. Perhaps it's an alternative form. Maybe it's an absentee ballot, that we have a special judge there. So if the poll doesn't open at 7, then this judge has a separate bag. Here, you can fill out this absentee ballot application and fill out the ballot and then put it in that separate envelope to deal with it, because we know they're not going to come back. And we need those people to feel if they've made an effort to come and vote, that they are going to have their vote counted in a special way. I don't know the solution. I just know we can't accept a 90 or 95% opening of polls on time. It should be 100%. Okay, do you want to do next?
You keep going.
Keep going? Okay, I'm on a roll. Okay, next, as Councilwoman Sneed said, how do we select the polls? One of our problems in 16, in addition to everything else, the senior citizen high-rise buildings were sold to developers and management companies. So many of those buildings, we could no longer have polling places. So we had to then transport. All the campaigns had people there trying to move people from their place where they live to their polling place. Some of those were restored in 18, but not all of them. For example, the Brentwood Apartments on 25th Street near Barclay. Those residents still had to walk several blocks, and many of them were disabled with crutches and wheelchairs and everything else. So what I would like to see is that we move every polling place that we can to our senior buildings, because that's where a huge bulk of the people who need to be able to vote can. What happened in 16, that at some of the senior buildings, they sent out the Board of Elections people to convince people to use absentee ballots. And that was something that was really very difficult for seniors. Everyone said, oh, it's easy to do an absentee ballot. You just go in line and can do this and this and this. Our seniors couldn't do that. And I'm a senior too. But many of the seniors, it was very difficult. So I would like to see the board that where we used to have senior buildings as a voting place, or where we have more than 100 or 200 seniors, that part of that is that we do an outreach to them to ensure that as many of them can vote absentee as they wish. Then the third one, John talked about training. And this training, and as many of you know, I used to be a school teacher in Baltimore City for 42 years. Doesn't matter, if you give someone that book, they're not going to be able to do it. And you can't expect everyone in one time to be able to learn everything. So I think the training should be, and I think you've started it, should be very specialized. And it should be based on the need of that judge. If it's a judge that has had no problems at that poll and it's been there a long time, then you do a short review and then here's the new things. Or if there's something very particular, like now you're putting signs up, ballots do not go through the scanner. So you put signs up, you put reminders. But I also believe, as an educator, that you need to assess, do they really understand what it is? Because this is too important to be able to turn people away that you can't vote.
Ms. Everhart, we do need you to wrap it up.
Training should be specialized and short. And if we do that, then hopefully every voter will be able to. So I think if you just pick a couple things and say this is what you want, and then you monitor to say how are we progressing to get there before the April 28th date, and then after April 28th, you come back and say, let's measure. How much better did we get this time on these things that we want to measure? So it's just not this hearing, but something after this, before the election, and then right after the election.
Thank you. And just to note, that is what we plan to do. We're not going to vote the resolution forward. We're going to recess at the end and revisit this after the 4th and then after the 28th. All right. Thank you. Okay. Has anyone else signed up to testify? Okay. So we're going to move to agency reports. My notes. Hand it back to you. So we will start with representatives from the Baltimore City Board of Elections.
Good afternoon, members of the council. Armstead Jones, Election Director. I'm here with Board President today to talk about the readiness for the special election for February the 4th. As of this time now, we have trained at least close to 1,000 judges for the 160-some precincts that will be in the 7th Congressional District. Training continues this week. We do have training scheduled for the break at UB starting on the 16th of March, and then we will move to another site for training on the 23rd of March at Mount Pleasant Church and Ministries. Recruiting election judges in Baltimore City has never been one of the best that we can do. We put forth a great effort to do that by doing advertisement, mailings to past judges, to new judges, trying to encourage people to come and serve as judges for the elections in Baltimore City. Of course, at this point, well, as I indicated, we still are continuing judges training and recruitment. As we speak now, the staff is still on phones calling, trying to recruit judges that served in the past that have not responded. And this is not an unusual situation. One year we recruited 3,500 people, 2,700 came to training, and by the time we got to election day, I believe we were down 500 or 600 more. So this has been a practice since I've been in the elections at Baltimore, in Baltimore City. So we take great pride in trying to recruit additional judges, knowing that by the time they go to training and we assign them to a polling place, that we will still lose hundreds of judges. One of the concerns I have, surrounding counties are paid far more than they are in Baltimore City. We only give $20 for a person to come to a 3 to 4 hour training. That needs to be looked at as well. A regular judge gets $165. Chief judge gets $225. Surrounding counties are close to $300. Those persons that received disability and other checks, social service, if they receive that check, then they deduct the money from their money. So these are situations that can be reinforced and helped so that those folk that commit themselves don't lose when they take time to serve as a judge. And then they come up with that scenario where they lose money that they've earned by working all day. This was a situation brought up several weeks ago at the training under Mr. John Willis, and a lot of the people in the room were co-signing, as we say, to the situation where one lady said that they deducted the money from her check. So that's one consideration I would like for you to look at, the cost that the pay for the judges in Baltimore City. We are moving forward with preparation for the election. As Mr. Willis has indicated, there are several new procedures that will be taking place. And one of the things that I've done—
Excuse me, sir. I'm not sure if everybody can hear you. Could you speak a little more directly into the mic? Just
Yes.
Thank you.
So one of the things that we are doing and have done is to make things more visual. We talked about the different changes. So we've added additional signs to the precinct to remind judges of certain procedures, that 5 people have to vote on the BMD, which is a state requirement, so there's a sign to indicate that. And any other new process that comes up and procedures, we have done that to make sure that election judges are aware of it. And of course, the manual is quite thick, but it's a statewide manual. that we use and all of the jurisdictions in Maryland use. The same-day voter registration manual is a separate book itself, and as Mr. Willis has indicated, there are quite a few scenarios that the judges need to learn, and they are taken through that process during training. Also, we have an open house that we do after training is over, that on like Saturday and Sunday, election judges can come to the University of Baltimore anytime during those hours, and any procedure or process that they're not familiar with, don't feel comfortable with, they can come to that open house and we will walk them through the procedure. So there is added reinforcement for all election judges that will take the time to come to that open house so that they can receive that additional training. That's pretty much sums up what I have, Mr. Chairman.
My name is Bruce Luchansky. I'm the president of the Baltimore City Board of Elections. I don't have anything specific to add to what Armstead said. I just wanted to introduce myself and simply share the fact that we're in a tremendously exciting time for the Board of Elections, in that, as everyone here recognizes, the Board of Elections consists of 5 board members, and then we have an election director, Armstead Jones, then a deputy election director, Abigail Goldman. The Board of Election members, we are obviously the vision people. What makes it so exciting for us right now is that all 5 of us are new to the board. There is not a single current member of the board who was on the board prior to June of 2019. One carryover member was just replaced, and we had a 5th new board member just join us the last board. This is what this means is that, in part, of course, currently the board doesn't have the level of experience to provide any current new insight into the procedures. However, what we do have are 2 things. Number one is that we are engaged and we are working very closely in a nonpartisan way, and what we bring are fresh eyes to this process. And we're very excited about learning the process and being engaged with opportunities for ways that we can improve the system and learn from, in whatever way we can, to improve the system. In addition to that, though, we're fortunate to have Mr. Jones and Abigail Goldman leading the charge. They are experienced staff. It is their responsibility, their job description is to manage the Board of Elections on a day-to-day basis, and we're very fortunate. Mr. Jones, if I understand correctly, has at least 12, maybe more than 12 years experience in the election director position. He has decades of experience in related positions, but I think specifically in the election director position, 12 to 14 years of experience. Abigail Goldman has been in the deputy election director position for more than 30 years. So they have seen it all and have the experience. And speaking on behalf of the board itself, so far in our young experience and our new experience, we've been very impressed. They seem to absolutely be concerned and committed to doing the best job that we can. We as a board are looking forward to continuing to learn from them and keep an eye out for every opportunity to improve our effectiveness and to be the most effective and efficient Board of Elections that we can be.
Okay, thank you. I did have a few questions, and then we'll go to the committee. So it was mentioned by several speakers so far, the issue of same-day registration. Mr. Jones, can you speak to the impact that it'll have on your operations, and also outreach efforts? How are we getting information out to the public about same-day registration? And also, will those who register on election day be issued a provisional ballot? Now, there's 3 questions. I can repeat them if you need to.
If a person qualifies for same-day voter registration, they will vote that same day if they qualify with those same scenarios. The other question, as far as, you mentioned the polling places, how they were chosen, was that one of them? Did you
Well,
mention that?
I'll let the council member ask that question again.
Your second question
Second
was?
question was, how are we getting information out to the public that they can register for on election day?
Well, as far as getting the word out to the voters that they can do that, of course, we depend a lot on the neighborhood associations. We do not basically advertise. If anything, it will be done by the paper, Sun paper, and other media. We don't basically send mailings out saying that there is a new process when it is done.
Is that staffing concerns?
No, it's not staffing concerns. It's not done anywhere in the state.
Okay. So it's typical to not, as there's changes, I mean, because I would imagine that probably adds to some level of confusion for individuals when they do arrive at the polls, not knowing process ahead of time.
Well, a lot of people come doing provisionals, and some that would normally do a provisional may qualify for the same day.
Okay.
That's where the difference comes in. As long as their ID verifies, then they would not do a provisional, they would do the same day.
Okay. And I guess the initial question on the impact, how does this change your operations at the polls?
Well, I think it's a concern, anything new, I would think not more so in Baltimore City, any new procedure process, I have a concern always. And of course, through the training that we have, they go through all of the scenarios with them. And of course, we always
Put the mic a little higher.
make sure, as I said, that when we do open house, that those persons, those judges that have a concern about same day would come, and the staff there under Mr. Willis, if that's their particular area that they're looking to enhance so that they're more aware of, that they would go through the process, and they have a manual that they have to take home, a separate manual for same day voter registration. They are encouraged to review those materials as well.
Okay. So second line of questioning is around access. Are all of the polling locations ADA compliant? And if not, how does your agency adjust to the needs of people who are living with disabilities?
All sites have to be accessible.
And last, and I'll hand it over. She's with voter equipment itself. Can you speak to how often the equipment is tested, recalibrated, technology updated, backup equipment, and then also this issue that the entire nation is talking about, cybersecurity. Are the machines secure, and how does your agency provide oversight over that?
Well, of course, with the lead of the State Board of Elections, security locally and on the state level is at high priority. Of course, we received information last week, and we are working with the state to ensure that all equipment is safe and secure. As far as logistics on the equipment, all equipment is tested. Logic and accuracy tests are done on it to make sure that from the beginning there are no votes on equipment. Batteries are charged, so it goes through a total screening before they even are delivered on the street.
Okay. I will stop here and hand it over to Councilmember Sneed. You had a question about polling locations.
Yes. And so I'm just curious because I felt like before, and Mount Pleasant, beautiful church, lovely people attend there and operate it. But the previous polling location that was in the Northeast District was right off of Moravia Road, was right off the highway. And so I just felt like the traffic that comes through there is definitely, people would stop in because they were coming from the highway and they would see the signs and say, oh, I forgot it was voting day, but let me stop in because I see this activity going on here. And then we changed it to Mount Pleasant, and you had to know that something was happening for you to come up on that property. So how do we distinguish, like, is there a set criteria that polling places that we choose, or is it just, hey, I want it to go here? How are we choosing these places?
Well, there's a difference in polling places and early voting. You are talking about when Maritime Old Heron Run was a early voting site and moved to Mount Pleasant. I think at one point they went under renovation, and I think that was the reason we moved it. And then the facility was small. The cafeteria was much smaller.
But I'm still curious, so how we still, for that's early voting, but how do we choose the other sites?
Regular polling places. Most of the regular polling places have been in existence for years. Now, when we had several years ago, a lot of the senior buildings were being renovated. So we had to move out of those, and we choose locations close around those facilities that we are leaving from, and that will accommodate us by parking, being accessible, and other state criteria that we must use.
So now that Maritime, I'm going back to the early voting spot, now that Maritime it is finished and maybe all the construction is done, in an example for another one, now that the construction is done with those places, do we see that those sites get open again? Or like, do we go back to those locations, or is it just we leave it as is?
Well, it depended on the facility itself. I think there was an issue with the size of the area we were in at Maritime as well. I will have to research it, and I can get back to you.
Okay, I got you. Hold on. Councilmember Dorsey.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First, I want to ask a question of Mr. Luchansky. Is that right? Can you just, in general, speak to? We heard you talk a lot about what you're taking away from your experience on the board. That you're learning a lot as new board members, and that you're impressed by the work you're seeing there. Can you talk about how it is that you and other members come to be members of the Board of Elections, and what you bring, like what expertise and background and experience do you and others bring to the board?
Sure. Well, I can't speak to each of the board members. Each of us comes from our own particular path. I know that for myself, I'm a former member of the Republican Baltimore City Central Committee, and so I've experience in contributing to civic life through the Central Committee. I've been an attorney for 35 years. I've been living in Baltimore City since 1982, when I came up from Prince George's County to go to law school. So I'm a lifelong Maryland resident. And so, having practiced law for those 35 years, once I hit adult life, it was my turn to give back, and that's why I became involved in the Central Committee. And after my time on the Central Committee, it was recommended to me, or I was advised, that an opening became available on the Board of Elections. My personal, again, I can't speak for any of the other specific members of the board. My view is that it's important to give back, and I love the fact that on the Board of Elections, it's a nonpartisan position. So, in fact, my opening remarks were not about what I take away. I'm sorry if I didn't articulate them clearly. While I was emphasizing the fact that I don't have a background in elections, so it's not like I bring the decades of experience that John mentioned, or the decades that Armstead and Abigail have. What I do have is a commitment to the most secure, fair elections we can possibly have. That's why I'm on the board. The more I learn, the more effective I will be in that role. But my point is that I'm committed to serving well in that role, and my impression is that all four of the other board members with whom I'm currently serving seem to share that passion and interest for learning, so that we can do our role as effectively as possible and make Baltimore City elections as efficient and effective and accurate as possible.
Thank you. I appreciate you helping clarify some of that. So I have a lot of questions. I'm actually very interested in the suggestions of these few kind of very specific goals that Ms. Eberhardt and Ms. McKenna discussed. Are we still planning to be opening? They talked about Baltimore County and other places setting up their polling places the night before and making sure that there are no technical problems left to the morning of the election. Is that something that we're going to be doing? Are we preparing to do that?
It has not been taken under consideration in Baltimore City. One of the things that we make sure that equipment is put in a location and locked and secured, not in a room that's open where people can gain access to it. That's a great concern for me as the director, that equipment is not pre-set up and just waiting for someone to come in the morning and go to work. It does not take long to set up the precinct. There's a technician there, and if there are any issues, and of course they are set up ready to go in most cases by 6:45 and ready to go at 7 o'clock. All of the equipment has been pre-tested several times in advance. Each piece of equipment that goes out has to go through a standard procedure. So at this time, there is no thought in my mind of setting something up in advance the night before, just in an open building.
But it sounds to me like that works in other jurisdictions, but it's not even considered. Would you give it consideration? I mean, is it something that you would discuss with these other jurisdictions, why they do it, or how they do it, how they feel confident in doing it, or you just determine that it's always going to be okay to come in the morning of and do it, no matter what might arise that could cause problems right there on the moment? I mean, there's always going to be unforeseeable circumstances. This seems to me a reasonable way of mitigating the possibility of an unforeseeable circumstance creating a problem for getting a poll open on time.
Well, you know, one of the things I can do is to find out how far they go in setting it up, what they do set up. Mm-hmm. Because I don't see them connecting all of the equipment the night before. Mm-hmm. And someone just comes in and turns a switch. I don't see that because of the security.
That seems a reasonable way to go, to find out a little bit more. I appreciate that. Look forward to hearing more about that.
And let me just say one additional thing. We are in schools and rec centers and public buildings, and there are activities that go on in these buildings in the evening. Basically, the plan that Baltimore City has used for decades, once the equipment goes to a building, it is put in a secure room where only person can gain access at that particular time is the janitor. And then that morning, once the judges arrive at 5:45, that equipment is brought out and set up. And that's been done just for security reasons itself.
You discussed the difference in pay between Baltimore and other jurisdictions. In the context of a number of comments from you and from Mr. Willis about the realistic unlikelihood of somebody reading and memorizing an 82-page manual, for example, and I think you referenced there actually being several different manuals. Given the unlikelihood of people really engrossing themselves in study of this and the challenges that exist around training, this seems really important, especially, you know, there's this sense in talking about the the open house kind of concept, where somebody who is going to walk away from a training essentially inadequately trained, essentially knowingly, self-admittedly unsatisfied with their understanding of how to do the job that they're there to do, is then going to self-start going to UB on their own time, unpaid, after they've already been paid utterly inadequately. I mean, what did you say, $20 for a 4-hour training? I mean, this is just absurd. I mean, is it even legal? I don't think it's legal to pay somebody that little. Can you speak about the decision-making process and where this comes from? I mean, the State Board of Elections, the City Board of Elections is really your state office. How does this happen in Baltimore but doesn't happen elsewhere?
Well, of course, the salary
And
comes...
Mr. Willis is also signifying that he has some responses.
Well, first of all, the pay comes from Baltimore City. Yes, sir. From Baltimore City. We are now a state agency, but for years we were under the local. And that was done for funding and other reasons to make sure that all boards were doing the same thing. And that's when they brought us all together as one. And but each jurisdiction pays different salaries, different money for training, and they also, as far as the training, as far as open house, you mentioned the open house, we have close to 500 or 600 that come back for open house. So it's just not people, and I think they're being sincere and using an opportunity to come to be reinforced in what they don't know. And that's an avenue. I was in education myself for 30 years. That's an area where people have an opportunity to come and say, hey, I think I need a little refresher on this or on that. And this is an opportunity to do that. Will all other folk do that? I doubt it. We can see that they don't. But I'm impressed by those persons that take this job seriously enough to come. And this is something that was instituted maybe 1 or 2 years after we came together with John Willis and the University of Baltimore to help reinforce the skills and to help folk remember. Now, we are looking at February 4th election. Our next election is not until, well, I'm not talking about the April 28th election. So persons that are being trained now, we want to be able to, at the end of March and the 1st of April, do another open house, because you're talking about a month away from being trained. And it's a lot. We talked about 2 manuals. The one manual probably has 200 or 300 pages, and the other one is a short book, maybe 50 pages or so. So I'm impressed by folk that want to come out and serve the citizens of Baltimore and do the right job.
Can we ask Mr. Willis? Mr. Willis, do you have any further comments to add to that?
Hello? Oh, it's working. The training fee of $20 is actually in state statute. And I tell the judges all the time, they're always lobbying, how are we going to get paid? Tell your senator and delegate. And if you want to raise that training, we're the lowest in the region, tied with Anne Arundel County for the lowest in the region. Other jurisdictions are $35, $50 for a training session.
So what you're saying is that the state sets a floor, but other jurisdictions are adding on to it?
No, it is in state statute. The amount is in state statute. With respect to the fee for, or the pay for judges, if you look in the election code, some jurisdictions the fee is set. In other jurisdictions, it allows the local government, it does set a minimum. But with respect to training, the $20 is set in the local board of elections, and you can't raise it. It's set. in state statute?
So the state statute is specifying that in Baltimore City, it's $20? Or,
Correct.
And it's different on a jurisdiction by jurisdiction basis?
Correct.
So it's our city delegation that we need lobbying for an increase here.
For the training budget. The other
Training
budget.
And is it preemptive of the local, of we, the city, tacking on, adding on additional
I'm
pay
not
to
aware
that?
of anybody trying that over the last 50 years. I mean,
Okay.
you could do that.
Unless we're preempted.
Yeah.
Unless it is a may or a shall or something like that. Okay.
But the rate for judges can be raised. Before you conclude, Chairman Burnett, all of us have been thinking about this, and I agree with Linda on 95% of what she said. But I have a couple basic suggestions that I would encourage the council to think about to solve this problem going forward. And I don't know whether you want me to say them now or you want me to wait.
We do have a line of questions, but if you can keep it short, because we do, I know.
That's
one of
always a
my-
challenge with me.
Nothing-
Let me lay them out there, and then we'll see what evolves.
My colleagues.
Number one, many jurisdictions around the country have gone to vote centers as opposed to precincts. In other words, consolidation of polling places. And you could put them all in senior centers or senior buildings. It doesn't matter to me. But that generates enormous efficiencies in terms of the numbers of judges you need, the ability to do repetitive training, etc. So that needs to be considered in Baltimore City and in other large urban jurisdictions. It's easy in Kent County where you get 9 precincts. All right. Number two, the facilities of the local board of elections, and I didn't tell Armstead I was going to say this, are inadequate. If you look at what goes on in the surrounding jurisdictions, the facility of the board of election is a combined facility where the warehousing of the equipment and the administration of the equipment is consolidated. That saves them a lot of time, and they could create their own training classrooms. So you could bring back people. Say you had one of the ideas I've had is every chief judge ought to achieve an 85% grade on a test, and every judge ought to achieve a certain grade on a test. But if you had your own facility and you didn't have to work around a university schedule, work around a church building schedule, you could do your own training in-house. That would be an enormous improvement for the administration of elections. And third, with respect to the judges, and I am concerned, as you are, Councilman Dorsey, about where these floors came from and how they evolved over the years. But the other one is that there is great disparity, and our judges know it, that in Montgomery and Prince George's you get $300, $350, and in the city you get $225 or $165. And that's a big issue, and I'm very concerned, and I've got some inquiries out, and I would like the council to pursue it, of this deduction of public benefits from your election judge pay. That is very discouraging for the very people who need that additional resources for them wanting to participate in the election process.
That is, we heard reports of that, or that is certifiably the case, that people, I mean, I don't want to say that I don't believe anybody, but...
No, I've been told that. I'm researching, I've put some calls into Annapolis to see where the authority is for that. We can follow up on that later.
Thank you.
Okay. So before I go to Councilmember McCray, we've been joined by Board of Elections member Joy Smith. Ms. Smith, you indicated you had something to add about the selection process for locations, or?
Yes, you want me to speak here?
There's no one by your desk. You should probably just be able to hand that one over. You don't have to stand up.
Good afternoon, everybody. Most of you know me. I'm Joyce Smith. I'm Vice President of the Board of Elections. And Councilwoman Sneed had asked about qualifications. I think it came from you, and how the selection was made. And what we have to do is go before the central committees with resumes and actually go through a process of questions and answers to see what you know and how much you know. Those names are then submitted to the governor, who makes the selection. The governor appoints the members to the Board of Election. I don't know if you know that, but from Baltimore.
My question was around the polling.
That was Dorsey's question.
Somebody's question.
Yep.
And on, for example, on my resume, I showed that I had spent a lot of years working with voter registration, voter training, and being out in the community. So that, I think, qualified me above some of the other candidates. But as of now, I still do a lot of work in the community, addressing community organizations and giving them updates on things like the same-day registration and registration and who can register. So trying to inform as many people as I can of what's new and things that they need to address. I think that was all for now.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Smith. Councilmember McCray.
Mr. Jones, what are we doing differently in 2020 for recruitment of of the election judges? You spoke briefly about mail-ins of past judges. You spoke about phone banking of past judges, but what are we doing differently in 2020 that we haven't done in past elections to recruit election judges?
Well, we have sent information to the media, indicating election judges are needed for the upcoming election. Let me just say one thing. One of the issues I think we've come into over the last so many years, the elected officials for a long time recruited election judges and submitted them to the Board of Elections. And so many years we have not been getting those names. Some of the delegates, senators, and even some of the council folk for many years had a list that they would submit to the Board of Election of people willing to do election day work. And that had helped tremendously through the years. And that has somewhat totally stopped. Now, I don't know if it's a new era or what it is, but that was one of the main ways that we had gotten judges to commit to serve. Other than that, on all of our flyers that go out advertising the election dates, election judges are placed on that flyer are needed, so that we can get the word out that we still are in need of election judges. I was on radio station last Sunday, and I indicated on that station, and I go on there 2 to 3 times before elections, and I indicate that we are in need of election judges. It's always been a great concern in the city to recruit more than what we need, because we know what happens toward the end.
Do we have, say, community, like a community outreach team within a Board of Elections that are going out within a community to recruit election judges, like something differently that we're doing? Are we doing anything different in 2020 versus past elections to recruit these judges?
We do voter outreach on a regular basis, going out doing voter registration in communities, and then when that is done, the person from the office also recruits election judges. We can look to see what else can be done in 2020 to recruit judges, but most of what we need to be able to do basically costs money.
Can I piggyback off of the councilwoman's question?
Councilmember Sneed.
How many altogether to run a citywide election? How many judges do you need? How many staffers do you need for citywide?
For citywide, for all polling places, I think I mentioned earlier we recruited close to 3,000 is a good number, but to make sure that we have substitutes downtown. We try to make sure we have several hundred downtown, just in case at a polling place out of 10 people, maybe 3 or 4 don't show up. We have enough to send a couple out there and wherever around the city. But each polling place has its own number based upon the amount of equipment that they have there, based on the equipment and the amount of voters in that precinct. So we could use as many as 4 or 5 in a precinct because they have maybe 500 voters. Some precincts may have 2,500, 3,000, and we may go up to 14 judges. So it's all based upon the amount of judges. Now, for the special election coming up, we are looking to use 1,800 judges. That's at the minimum that we think that we can run that particular election.
Can I, one more question to the councilwoman's question. Do we work with schools to recruit 16 to 18-year-olds to help out in this process?
We've done that through the years, and to be honest with you, it has not materialized much.
Councilmember McCray.
So you said we need 1,800 minimum judges for the special election. What are we at right now?
Right now, I think we're at about 1,000 trained, and 800 and some in training in the next 2 weeks.
For my last question, you already went into the special elections. What unique preparations have been taken for the February 4th, 2020 congressional special election? What unique preparations have been taken?
Say that question again, I'm not clear.
I'm sorry, I'm under the weather. What unique preparations have been taken for the February 4th special congressional election?
Well, no, I would say nothing special. We are engaging to move forward with an election that, just like another election, is just a special election with one particular race on it. We're preparing with the judges, technicians. We've met with all of the facility people in the city. We've met with city stat, all of those folk that we use the watch center on election day for all calls, emergencies. So we have been preparing for the last 3 months, looking forward to the February 4th election.
Councilmember Clark.
Thank you very much. Mr. Jones, thank you for your leadership. Thank you to the new members of the board. All new, that's always a good, that's kind of almost like a couple of years ago the city council was. And see how successful it's been. Yeah. I want to get back to Linda's and 3 issues, but just the first one if I can. Opening the polls on time. And I heard what you said about security, but then you said 5:45 a.m. So I stayed at polls every election day for 1,000 years, as you know. And by the way, thank you very much to the election board, because I'm always calling in about some crisis or another, and they've always responded and helped out at the polls. So basically, I got it that you can't leave something set up in a lot of places the night before, because something could happen. So then I began to think about, well, how many people do you have, how many techs do you have working on a general election day or a primary election day for the city of Baltimore that can get to the polls and set up in time for everybody to open at least by 7 a.m., but I mean open for business at 7 a.m. So how many technicians who really know what they're doing, and the ones that work at Mervo, where I always go, they've always known what they were doing. That's my perspective. How many do you have out there that are wandering around in the small hours of the morning?
Well, of course, there's a technician for every precinct. So if there's 2 precincts in a building, there are 2. And
Okay.
the technicians that we have, most of them have been there since we've started the technician position. When we started the technician position, we reached out to Baltimore City government to reach out to their technical folk to supply most of those people. So
Did you
these
say
are
one
trained.
per which did you say, one per poll or one per precinct?
Most of them have 1 per precinct.
Oh, so like a Mervo would have 2?
Should have 2.
Okay, so is there a way that they can, so let's talk about opening everything on time, and let's talk about you can't leave them hanging there overnight. So now it's early in the morning, and you've got, like, at a Mervo, I use that because that's where I'm always standing. At a Mervo, you probably have 2. Are they both working at the same time? Are they going to work the whole hours of the
They work the
election?
entire day.
7 to 8, or actually 5:45 or something to 8. Is there, so we're covered with them, and they're the ones that have to set things up. The judges have to get there.
Right.
Who sets up the tables and stuff like that? I mean, judges?
Judges, technicians all pull together and
They
set
pull it
up.
together.
Right.
And they all do it like, they begin at about 5:45.
Right.
So what goes wrong that we couldn't have every poll open on time across the city?
Well, I mean, there are times where they may have equipment problems. There are some times where, and I've seen it through the years, where you don't have a chief judge there, no one steps up to get the operation moving.
Okay,
Waiting
so
on
that's,
one
right.
individual to come.
All right, so everybody's waiting for the boss judge to show up, and maybe she's late, everybody else is there.
But there should be 2 chief judges there.
For a
Precinct.
For a
You
precinct.
should have a Democratic chief judge, Republican, or a independent person in that position.
Okay,
And of course, if you have problems within your precinct, you're supposed to reach out if there is another precinct there to solicit help. I need help, I'm short. And they've done it all the time. I can, you send me 2 people because I need to, you have enough.
I hear what you're saying, and so I wonder if while you're looking at these recommendations that really are important, and I even like the idea of walking out with a bag full of absentee ballots, so people at least have a chance to vote if all else is, if there's a fire or something, you know what I mean? But if they get to vote, because as Linda says, they're not coming back. I've been doing this a long time too, longer, I don't know. But very few come back. They think they're gonna come back, but they don't come back. So if we could kind of look at this that way, like, it sounds as if also it's a personnel kind of thing. People don't work with each other every day. They're gathered together now, and the chief judge isn't there, and nobody wants to, like, jump the gun and take away that authority, and she's not there, and what's gonna happen? But it seems to me that judges, if you can work with judges and say, the priority is open the poll.
That's what we tell them.
Okay, well, you'll do it again, right? And say, so so chief judges, you gotta be there. But if you're not, you're gonna have somebody who is a judge here take charge until you are.
Most of the time, and of course, as I indicated, we have the call center that's operational at least 5 o'clock in the morning at Central Police Station. We do a call center there citywide. So any issues that go on, judges call in. We have staff there to resolve the issue. We don't have a chief judge. Is there anybody there willing to step up? Is there a second precinct there? Anybody over there
Right.
willing to step up? Or let us talk to the chief judge in the other precinct. You need to help them get up and running.
Okay, well, let's see if we
There
can
are
do
things
it.
in place to do that.
100% this, 100% February 4th.
Yes.
That's a great
My
task.
goal is always 100%.
Well, I know, and you often achieve it, and that's why I'm taking the time to talk this out with you.
Thank you.
Yeah. And one last thing I want to say, and as the chair knows, I have to leave, and I apologize. I don't know who's deducting this salary from somebody's check, like a Social Security check or an SSI?
SSI more so.
Is it SSI?
I think so.
Okay, well, we're gonna look into that one. Okay, SSI. What a rip.
And one thing I do want to emphasize that was brought up, Baltimore City is the only major jurisdiction that does not have a modern warehouse, office, and warehouse together. Whereas Mr. Willis indicated that we can perhaps do our own training, not trying to take resources from him or the University of Baltimore.
No, you're right.
But this is something that I've been asking for years. The warehouse is out Franklin Town Road, roof is leaking. We've tried to get that fixed,
Oh, jeez.
and that's not fixed. There's millions of dollars worth of equipment in that building.
Yep.
The building is old. We need a modern building for the Baltimore City Board of Elections to have its warehouse and office. And I hope that will be done before I decide to call it quits.
Well, that sounds like a challenge, and a good one for us to have.
Yes.
And it was recommended by Mr. Willis, but we'll follow up anyway. Just kidding. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
It's
Thank you,
piggybacking
Mr.
off of her
Director.
question.
Okay, so there's a direct follow-up, Councilwoman Sneed.
Instead of waiting, have you gone out to BDC or whoever to compile a list of these are buildings that we are interested in? Have you started the process instead of just waiting around? Have we compiled to
We've
see?
looked at some buildings over the last 5 to 6 years. Once it gets started, then people change. Basically, in the city itself, it's sort of hard to find the square footage that we need. Because the warehouse itself is probably close to 70, 80,000 square feet, plus adding an office to it. So there has been some legwork done in the past. Once we get started, then it dies out.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, may I just add to that? I appreciate very much the council's interest in this topic. This is truly a front burner topic for the reasons that are obvious. In my first board meeting back in June, prior to coming to the Baltimore City Board of Elections meeting, would be my first meeting, I was invited out to the Anne Arundel County Board of Elections by its president to sit in on their meeting, get to meet some of the folks over there. They are probably the most recent local Board of Elections to have succeeded in getting their own building. I have the privilege of having access to some of the information and some of the specs that they have to identify the square footage that they need and the specific details. I would welcome contact with whatever delegate, whatever councilman you would suggest would be the contact person to talk about how we would go about the process of identifying what we need so that we can work together to try to get it.
Thank you. Yeah, we can talk offline. I'd love to coordinate that. You're on the committee. We got it. So I had a few more questions related to election judges and a few other topics that we've talked about this afternoon. Bilingual voters, are there intentional efforts to recruit election judges that are Spanish speaking, especially in parts of the city where there are a lot of individuals who English may not be their primary language?
Yeah, in the past, we have had, I'm trying to think of the name of the group that has supplied us with persons to help assist with persons with foreign language. Can't think of the name of the group, but we in the past have had the opportunity to have available persons that are available to help persons in the polling place when they have language barriers, so that the election judges, and we have some that are election judges that we place in those areas of the city where we know that population is.
Yeah, we can talk offline. There's a few organizations I could send your way that I think would be interested in partnering. And then the other two pieces were, and I'll hand it over to Councilmember Dorsey, were just recommendations on the recruitment of eligible voters at between 16 and 18, high school students or recent graduates. My recommendation would be offline to reach out to the Mayor's Office of Employment Development or Family Success. They do a lot of outreach to young people, young families. There's obviously a lot of conversation in the media about squeegee boys. This could be an opportunity for pay for them. And there's a lot of effort to do outreach and plug them into different opportunities. So those are areas that I think we can just talk offline about ways to help with recruitment there. And then the other piece I'd mentioned about the facilities, have you had conversations with Department of General Services about the school surplus process? Every year there's school closings. I don't know if that fits ideally about what you're looking for as far as space, but is that a part of the conversation as buildings become publicly available for use by local government or state government?
Yeah, one of the things, schools don't work. The largest room in there is the cafeteria or the gym.
Okay.
And of course, the majority of our space is for warehouse.
Got it. Okay. Understood. Councilmember Dorsey?
Maybe this was answered. I don't think it was, though. Specific to the upcoming special election, how many polling places are there? Did you say 160 something?
168.
186.
86.
186 in Baltimore City, and others in Howard County and such.
Right.
Um,
So there's like 521,000 and about 215,000 in Baltimore City.
And so out of these 186, we're 2 weeks away from this election. Has every one of those been physically inspected already very recently in order to make sure that they are a fully accessible place?
We have what we call a voter integrity meeting, which covers school system, libraries, rec centers, persons from Powell centers if they still exist, all representatives from the city that oversee their buildings. They're at a regular meeting with us. We meet once a week. They inspect all of the buildings, make sure all of the buildings are ready. So that has been done.
Okay, so we've already verified that all of the planned polling places, and how many polling places have changed since are different from what they were in 2018? I mean, it was clearly a problem in I don't remember whether it was 16 or 18. In 2018, there were polling places that changed. The voters didn't know that their own polling place had changed. They arrived on the election day and found that out. How many have changed since 2018?
Well, I can't give you a number now of how many have changed. There have been some changes. But for a voter to say that they don't know, we are mandated to mail out a new card to them to notify them of the change.
Okay, I get things in the mail, and I certainly missed that. I noticed. I was looking to see. I didn't see that the board, as far as I can find, doesn't have a Twitter account. Do you have like a social media communications?
There is a Twitter account.
There is. I couldn't find it. It must be something I can't figure out. I'd like to be able to follow it. Do you know what the
I don't do that kind of stuff.
handle is?
We'll find out for you.
Okay, because
I'll send it to you.
I can't find
know
it.
what it is,
I
but
found
I
Baltimore County Board of Elections very quickly,
Oh, yeah.
but not ours.
Yeah, but by law, if any polling place is moved, we have to notify them.
How easy would it be to provide us a list of all of the changed polling places that are different now and will be different for this election in 2 weeks than what they were in 2018? I would like for us to be able to push that information out to make sure that as many people as possible who may have missed that mailing that they received. I probably would have missed that mailing had it come to me. I don't know. I'm not very good with my mail.
I will see that you can get a list to that change.
I would really like to be able to help help get that information out. Sorry, I've been listening a lot. I know I had a lot of questions, and I'm kind of reviewing over here to make sure that there was a question about, we heard a question about bilingual judges. Okay, and do we have enough?
So if you want to reiterate your point.
Yeah, we do have areas of the city where we do have judges working to help with that. And of course, the chairman has indicated that he has some avenues that we can explore, so we'll be working along with him as well.
May I ask along those lines? Has the council received information that suggests there are either polling places or neighborhoods, areas that require bilingual assistance that haven't received it? Or is this just more of a general question in terms of serving the public need in general?
So I asked the question just knowing that there are a growing population in parts of the city, fastest growing population are ESOL speakers. So it was just a concern knowing that, one, there's sort of a national concern about turnout, especially with sort of the feeling of tension from this presidential administration and people's, whether it relates to the census or concerns about documentation. So knowing that's already sort of one issue, and so we want to, really my question was, we don't need additional barriers for people who may not be primary English speakers to be able to come to vote. So that was, I can't speak for the full council or for my colleagues who represent these areas, but for me, it was an area of concern.
Fantastic, thank you.
Yep. So we did have, we stayed on the agency report for the Board of Elections the whole time.
Okay.
We did have representatives from finance that if you do have questions, we can refer them out that are finance related. So my apologies for that. Are there any other questions from the council? You good?
I think I'm
Okay.
Well, just one more.
Go for it.
You said you need about 1,800 people to run this, to make this special election happen. And at the very beginning of your remarks, you said that you've recruited about 1,000 now.
Well, we've recruited close to the 1,800. We've recruited close to the 1,800, 900, close to 1,000 have been trained.
Okay.
So we do have classes scheduled the next week or so that will bring in close to 700 to 800 other judges. And we're still scheduling for March beyond the special.
But for the special election here, so we're 2 weeks away. We have 1,100 trained. You've got like 700 more waiting to be trained who have been recruited. So we're at about 1,700 recruited. About half of them were trained. You really need at least 1,800 to do this successfully. And in your earlier remarks, you also said that there's a pretty steep drop-off rate. You said in the past there have been instances where you recruited 3,500 and then only 2,700 of them ended up actually getting trained, and then another, say, 400 or 500, 600 didn't show up on election day the way that they're supposed to. So that's a pretty steep drop off there. That's like a 1/3 drop off. I mean, in order to hit your 1,800, you need like what, 2,400, 2,700 recruited, And so we're like 1,000 short of what we need in order to ensure that we're not going to drop off so low that we don't have enough.
Well, one thing about it, we are training now for the special election and the regular primary election.
Uh-huh.
So all of those numbers together, if we need the additional judges, we have those judges in the pool.
But it sounds to me like you really need 2,700 recruited right now for the election 2 weeks in order to ensure that you have 1,800 who are going to show up
Well, 1,800, in my opinion, is the ideal number.
to actually show up at polls.
Yeah, if they show up at the polls. So as I indicated earlier, if it's a precinct that has 10 judges and we get 7, we'll be fine. Of course, we're only talking about one race. You're not gonna, people, I don't wanna cast doubt on the citizens of Baltimore about coming out, but I don't see 10%. I've been doing this for a while.
I think that answered my questions. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you all for being here.
Okay. So there is no one else signed up to testify. We are going to recess this hearing and reconvene after the special election on a date to be announced. With that, we will recess. Thank you all. Please look under your seats. Make sure you didn't leave anything. Thank you for coming out.